Hi. Well, it's a muggy day in Pasadena today. We don't get those very often, but today, although the temperature is not quite so high, it feels a lot hotter because it's so humid. We even had an open-air concert that my wife and I were at last night stopped before it was due to because it started raining, and there was some concern that the musicians might electrocute themselves, which obviously would have spoiled the evening for them and for us, really. But now we are back to it being sunny, but as I say, rather muggy. A couple of more preliminaries before I move on to the actual material that relates more to week 2. One is to mention that the logic really for using the Coogan book as a textbook. I sometimes like to divide Old Testament scholars in this way. There are people at the right-hand end, if you like, who are fundamentalists. There are people who are at the left-hand end who are agnostics and atheists. And then there are groups in the middle who are either liberal conservatives or conservative liberals. And I'd call myself, and this is where Fuller as a whole stands, liberal conservative, whereas Coogan exemplifies what it means to be a conservative liberal. So that means that his views in the end are not necessarily so different from mine, but they are a bit different, and his presuppositions are a bit different, and so you get the advantage of getting the perspective of somebody who is a bit different from me but isn't outrageous. The other thing which kind of complements that fact is that I hope you will see clearly how the focus of much of this course lies on reading the Bible itself. Now, my experience is that many students come to studying the Old Testament thinking that they know roughly what it's about, but knowing that they haven't actually read it, but they know roughly what it's about because their Sunday school teacher told them. And then I love the way in which I send them away to read the Old Testament, and they come back and say, but it doesn't say what my Sunday school teacher told me. And sometimes that's good news, sometimes it's bad news. A lot of the focus in the course is on reading the scriptures for yourself, seeking to read them as if you were reading them for the first time, as if it wasn't you reading them for the first time. So make the most of that element in the course. We'll be looking at Genesis 1 to 11 this week, and we will be looking at the relationship between Genesis 1 to 11 and the Babylonian creation story, Enuma Elish, which you read for last week. And in honor of that fact, here's my t-shirt, which has got the first words of the Babylonian creation story on it. I think it's quite interesting and illuminating and challenging, but also instructive to look at the way in which the Genesis 1 creation story both compares with and contrasts with that Babylonian story. And it helps us with, or it interacts with, questions about when Genesis was written and how historical it is. And quite a bit of the attention we'll be giving this week to Genesis relates to those questions about the historical nature of the book and when it was written and so on. A kind of subset of that is the question about the relationship between Genesis and science, and we'll be looking at that this week. Beyond that, we'll be looking at, of course, at the actual content of the book in light of the study that you've done. And there are some reflections of mine arising out of student questions over the years on Genesis 1 to 11. In looking at Genesis 12 to 50, we'll pay quite a bit of attention to the nature of family life and marriage in Genesis, which is quite disturbing, really, unless you find some encouragement in discovering that marriages and families tended to be as dysfunctional in that context as they are in our context. And a great implication of that is the wonderful fact that God is working out his purpose in the world, his purpose as he works towards the redemption of the world through these often dysfunctional marriages and families. And maybe part of the good news then of Genesis is the fact that God is at work in that way through us. The idea of those stories in Genesis is not for us to learn how to be married people and how to do family. It's to see how God is at work through marriages and families that often are in rather a bad way.